players will help you reach your fantasy finals. What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch here, back with another week of must-add players. It's semi-final week, and you might need one or two adds to put you over the top to get to the championship game. I'm here to give you that advice at every position. If that sounds good, spike the like button and don't forget to subscribe for weekly fantasy football advice here on OwnersBox Fantasy. Let's get started. Let's get right into it. Comment below any question you may have about a specific player in this video or any ad drop ideas that you may have and you just need another opinion. Let me know in the comments section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Let's begin. At the quarterback position, we're going to go position by position in this video. Matthew Stafford is the quarterback that I would recommend if you need a quarterback and you're looking for a streamer in week 16. I've had many seasons in fantasy football where I've been streaming quarterbacks in semifinals and finals. Like, it is totally normal. Don't feel like just because you've had a quarterback that's been your primary starter most weeks of the season that you can't switch it up if that quarterback has a really difficult matchup. Unless that guy's name is Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, or Lamar Jackson, maybe Jalen Hurts, there are not many quarterbacks that I feel are secure week to week in fantasy football this year. Matthew Stafford is one that I think is going to be a quarterback one in week 16. In recent weeks, the Jets have allowed 25 points, 32 points, 26 points, and 28 points to their opposition. Now, when you actually put into perspective who the Jets have been playing in those games, it gets even more brutal for the Jets defense. A defense that was supposed to be the boogeymen. The 2000 Ravens, the 85 Bears. Nowhere close are the 2024 Jets. They allowed 25 points to Mac Jones. And they also allowed 28 points to Anthony Richardson. Now, these aren't fantasy points. These are real points to that offense. What do you think the Rams are going to do? A team that scored in the 40s against the Bills. Now, maybe this game has weather because it is in New York or New Jersey, but Stafford has been pretty darn consistent outside of last week where it was raining in San Francisco. And the Niners, like I've said in my Stardom Situm video, they've always played Stafford well. The Jets, I don't think have that same advantage. And as long as it is a decent day outside, maybe a little cold, I think Stafford will get back to his ways of week 11 through week 14, where he had a minimum of 2 touchdowns in every one of those games, including a great game against Buffalo and a great game against the Patriots in that stretch. So I see Stafford having a very good game. If really, I kind of feel like he's going to be a really great floor play at the very least. Okay, so Stafford is the quarterback pickup of week 16 in the semifinals. The running back position. We spoke about Cleveland. The running back room is now a little bit quiet. Nick Chubb got injured. Nick Chubb will be out of lineups. Jerome Ford will be somebody to pick up, and I think he's the biggest pickup of week 16 this week. He's the best and the biggest. Jerome Ford gets to take on the Bengals, a team that you can definitely run the football on, and you will have opportunities to score touchdowns just as Tony Pollard did last week. And Jerome Ford was extremely impressive against the Chiefs last week. 7 attempts, 84 rushing yards, had an explosive run in that mix, a touchdown on the ground, 2 catches, and 20 yards. With Nick Chubb out, Jerome Ford becomes the starting running back of the Browns. The guy that's going to get around 15 touches in this backfield. And in my opinion, Ford has looked better than Chubb since Chubb has returned on average. So I like Ford a lot, especially considering the matchup, a game that could be high scoring. Ford could score multiple touchdowns and win you this week. So I would put him at the top of my list of waiver claims for the semifinals. The second running back add of week 16 is Keandre Miller of the New Orleans Saints. Now, this is definitely Alvin Kamara dependent. If Kamara is injured, then maybe Keandre Miller could go off. If he's not injured and he's healthy, he's not playable. So I definitely think you should pick up Miller. You should add him to your waiver wire list. But I don't necessarily feel like he could win you the week, dependent on what happens with Kamara, because he left the game injured against the Commanders. We haven't heard too much about his availability for this week. And really, when you think about it, why would the Saints force Kamara onto the field? They're not going anywhere. They're not making the playoffs. They don't even have their quarterback starting. So this could be a real opportunity for Miller to showcase his ability to the Saints and potentially be their back of the future, at least to complement Alvin Kamara. But Miller has looked decent in his rushing opportunities. He actually gave their backfield a bit of a spark on the ground in that last game against the Commanders that allowed them to surge down the stretch of that game and nearly pull off the incredible upset. It was very close. It came down to a 2-point conversion. Miller, I think, could be a guy that could play in the flex in a game against the Packers, where you can definitely run on the Packers a little bit. That's going to be a team that's going to score plenty of points on the Saints defense, and the Saints are going to have to chase in that game. I feel like Miller is definitely going to be an asset to a flex if Kamara is out. The third running back that I would add this week for the semifinals is Craig Reynolds of the Detroit Lions. Reynolds is a bigger back. He's a lot like David Montgomery, and the reason you should add him is because Montgomery got injured and he's out for the season, I believe, for the Detroit Lions. So Craig Reynolds becomes instantly really fascinating because Jahmyr Gibbs obviously becomes the starter, the main ball carrier, and the guy that's going to get most of the touches in the backfield. But the Lions love having 2 to 3 running backs that touch the football, mostly 2. And Reynolds becomes a great backup for Montgomery because he's great in between the tackles, he's physical, he's hard to take down, and he's good in short yardage. All the things that Montgomery is also good at. So he won't get as many touches as Montgomery, but this is the best offense, like most balanced, all-around offense in football behind the best offensive line in football. This guy is an instant pickup because at the very least, he has touchdown upside. Because we know Gibbs is not a great red zone back. As talented as he is a little bit smaller, and his best skill is his speed and slick nature, not his power game. And that's what Reynolds brings to the Lions backfield now that Montgomery's out. So I love him as an addition, especially in half PPR formats. You know, the less that receptions matter, he's definitely more important, just like Montgomery. So Reynolds, love him, pick him up for the week. And if you're desperate, I might even flex him against the Bears because they're terrible against the run this year, especially lately. At the wide receiver position, we have a few different names for you. The one that I like the most and I'm most confident in is Jaylen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's had 2 straight weeks of heavy involvement in one of the best passing offenses and offenses in football with one of the best quarterbacks this year, Baker Mayfield. McMillan has had 7 targets and 6 targets in back-to-back weeks. He's had 21 points and 18 points in back-to-back fantasy weeks, and he has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. He plays Dallas this week, who allow the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. McMillan was very talented coming out of Washington. I liked him in the draft class, and he was kind of seen as a training camp breakout for the Bucs. But because he was stuck behind Godwin and Evans, and then later in the year, he had injuries, which allowed guys like Sterling Shepard to become a more important offense of option. I see McMillan now as being that guy that they're trying to make work as that Chris Godwin, the guy that moves around. He plays in the slot. He plays out wide. They move him around. And he's been a red zone threat as well. I've seen his confidence grow big time in this offense. Baker has confidence in him now. And he's actually showcasing his real talent. And that's made the Bucs offense so much more explosive lately. So I think they're going to keep playing him because they've seen what he brings to their offense. I think he's going to have another big game against the Cowboys. I'd be all in on McMillan if I needed a receiver this week. If I was dicey about my wide receiver 3 situation or flex situation, I'm kind of in that boat in one of my leagues where I don't have the greatest wide receiver 3 situation. Like Jalen Waddle got hurt. Deebo Samuel's not playing well. And really this situation, Calvin Ridley has been kind of quiet, not great, not terrible lately. So I might be looking at a guy like McMillan to help me this next week in the semifinals. I might start him over those options because he might have more upside given the touchdown upside, the targets he's seen, the consistency, and the offense he plays in. So I really like him this week. I think that if you need a flex or a wide receiver 3, he could be an option for sure. Jaylen Coker of the Carolina Panthers would be my second option at wide receiver due to the opportunity. Coker was one of those receivers in the draft class, another rookie here, that a lot of people liked as an underrated name. He's 6'3". He's got the size to play on the outside, but he also has great route savvy, and he's kind of well beyond his years in terms of the ability to get open through route running. He's not the most dynamic in terms of speed, but his ability to separate based on the nuance of the position is definitely there. 4 catches on 6 targets, 110 yards, and a touchdown. That wasn't his only good game this year either. And now that Leggett is down and out, Adam Thielen is the only receiver that's reliable for Bryce Young, which means Coker's going to be on the field, which is first and foremost, and someone else has to catch the ball besides Adam Thielen. And it could be Jaylen Coker after he had a huge 80-yard touchdown against the Cowboys. This week he plays Arizona, who rank just average 15th against wide receivers. So due to his opportunity, due to the fact that somebody other than Thielen has to catch it, due to the fact that he's already shown a little bit of promise in a couple of games already, he could be an explosive option for a high upside boomer bust option in your flex this week. Calvin Austin, I think, is a name that I don't think a lot of people are going to bring up, but I actually really like his matchup this week, especially if George Pickens doesn't play. I love Calvin Austin. He plays Baltimore. Baltimore is 31st in pass yards allowed this year, and they're last in pass first downs allowed. They also complement that with being an excellent run defense. So if the Steelers are smart, they're going to have to throw the ball, especially if Baltimore moves the ball better against a TJ Wattless Pittsburgh Steelers defense. The Ravens are favored by 6 points, which means they're likely going to score, which is going to force Russell Wilson to throw. Calvin Austin has been one of his favorite receivers as of late, especially without Pickens. Right? In 3 out of his last 4 games, Calvin Austin has had 10+ fantasy points. This past week was his most consistent game, and he showed off his ability to separate down the field and run routes out of the slot. Austin is explosive, he's fast, and he brings quickness to the offense, something that no one else on the offense has other than Pickens, and he's injured. He reminds Wilson of Tyler Lockett in that manner. Smaller guy, but shifty and fast. And I think because of his speed, he could be a real big vertical threat against a defense that allows a lot of big throws down the field and is bad against the pass overall. So Austin could be a great boomer bust, especially if Pickens is not playing. He might even become the number 2 receiver by the time we hit the playoffs for the Steelers, and I wouldn't be surprised. This is still a young player developing. Romeo Doubs is going to be the final name I throw out there at wide receiver. One of the many Packers names: Watson, Reed, Doubs, and Wicks, right? Doubs this past week, 3 receptions, 40 yards, 2 touchdowns versus Seattle. And this week, he also has a decent matchup. He plays the Saints, who allow the 7th most points to wide receivers. So Doubs is a little bit risky because you have to deal with the competition of Jacobs being the running back and them running the ball heavily. They're a heavy run offense, complemented by Reed getting the design touches from the backfield and from the jet touch pass and the screens. Then you've got to deal with Watson being the deep threat. So Doubs is that ex-physical outside wide receiver that had multiple touchdowns. He also functions as a bit of a deep threat, just like Watson, but he's also a threat to score multiple touchdowns in any game he plays. He's had 3 17-point fantasy games in PPR out of his last 7 games. So nearly 50%, right? Nearly 50% of the time he's putting up a startable fantasy week. So it's definitely boomer bust, but based on his resurgence after his injury, I think he's definitely worth a pickup and a thought. I'm not saying I would trust him necessarily in the fantasy playoffs, but you could certainly do worse, especially with his upside. At the tight end position, Brenton Strange came out of absolutely nowhere. Some people would call it strange. 11 catches on 12 targets, 73 yards versus the New York Jets. Like I said, the Jets defense is lousy. And they allowed Brenton Strange, a guy that not many people really know about, he's been the backup tight end for Jacksonville for the last couple of years, to go off. This week, the matchup gets even better. He plays the Raiders, the 4th worst team against tight ends in the NFL. Strange could have another good game. Mac Jones loves dumping the ball off and throwing short, and Strange has become that guy for him, the safety blanket for Mac Jones. I would expect Mac to move the ball a little bit against the Raiders as well, and it will probably be a grind of a game, and don't watch it, but Strange could definitely put up a fantasy usable week against one of the worst teams against tight ends overall. Defensively, I like Atlanta as a stream option versus the New York Giants. Any team against the Giants, I would start. Whether it's Drew Lock or whether it's Tommy DeVito, the Italian stallion, I would start Atlanta. Not only do the Giants absolutely suck and they can't block and their quarterback position is awful, but Atlanta's been good recently as a fantasy defense. They put up a 20-point week against the Raiders, and they put up an 11-point week just a couple weeks back against the Chargers. So 2 out of their last 3 weeks, they've had 10-plus fantasy points as a defense, sneaking under the radar. It's a must-win game for Atlanta, and it's probably going to have to come through their defense because their offense has been absolutely lousy as of late. So I like the Falcons as a defense to put up a performance in your fantasy semifinals. The kicker. We haven't brought up kicker very many times, but it is the fantasy playoffs, and all points matter. Will Lutz would be my addition. He's probably half owned in leagues, right? So that allows him to be available in about half the leagues you play in. He's been the 6th best kicker in the NFL in terms of field goals. He has the 6th most field goals in the NFL this season. He also is tied for 4th most points over the last month, with 50 points at the kicker position. And he does play the Chargers, a divisional foe that they played already. And it's the best red zone defense in football. They're 1st in red zone percentage. So Lutz is likely going to kick a lot of field goals, especially considering this will likely be a defensive game. I don't see the Chargers being able to move the ball that well against the Broncos. And I think the Broncos will be settling for 3s once they get into the red zone due to Bo Nix, a rookie quarterback, their run game is lousy, and the Chargers defense is great in the red zone. So Lutz could put up like 4 field goals in this game, and I wouldn't be shocked. Those are your must-add players for Week 16. Fantasy semifinals this week. Make sure you add the right pieces to your team. All points matter, all starts matter, all positions matter, and don't overlook these names. Thank you guys for watching. It's Mitch, and we'll see you in the fantasy finals. Peace.